This is Scott McDonald of Dr. Demographics, and I want to thank you for joining me. Every week I say something I think is important. We talk about trends, we talk about data. I even talk about places in the country that are showing most promise for where you ought to consider either purchasing a practice or doing a startup. We're going to do the same thing today. I just want to state that sometimes the things that we talk about are more important and better organized. And this is such a day. I think this is going to be an important session. So I hope you'll pay attention, and please feel free to pass this along to your friends and let them know that we offer these services. DrDemographics.com is the website. And as that'll let you know, we are celebrating our 40th year in business. I've been doing this since I had hair, which was a long, long time ago. I'm not bitter. Believe me, I've got great grandchildren and just exceptional kids. But I've made so many friends throughout the United States who've helped me kind of keep an eye on what's important and kind of keep in perspective the things that are not. So our discussion today is going to be on target locations, places that people are looking to go to, and places that people are running away from. And I want to talk to you about why, what these locations have in common. So let's go ahead and I'll share my screen and let's continue on with this. Now, the idea of finding locations that are commonly targeted, places that are also considered a destination, that's been changing for a long period of time. And I can honestly say that every state has got some good places and some places that are terrible. But some states have far more places to target and to consider going to. Now, some of you are right now wrapping up your professional education. You're in medical or dental school. Many of you are beginning to kind of evaluate where you want to associate. Some are thinking, I need to open up a practice and start taking advantage of the opportunities that are presented because it's getting a little late. Now, I say that idea that it could be too late because the interest rates are very high. In some places, mortgage rates are incredibly high. That doesn't mean there's no hope. But I want to explain to you not just where I'm recommending, but also the standards at which we're looking for why some locations are better than others. So please pay close attention. Now, granted, it's helpful to know the places that young doctors are targeting for practice. In other words, you want to know where your colleagues are thinking about going. They are, in fact, going to be your competition. There are other practices that they're thinking about selling, and many practices contact about, well, what can I do to increase the production and the collections of my practices? How do I grow my patient base? And that is an important theme, and I'll be covering a little bit of that today. But it should not imply that the locations that everybody else are going to or is going to are the only places to look. Sometimes when it's a mob who is traveling in one direction, you really ought to consider going the opposite direction. Now, these are not the only places to go, and they're not particularly the best. I want to tell you a fact that you may have thought about, maybe not. And that is what works for one person may not work for another. And often the places that you want to go are unique in their reasoning or rationale for you, and they may not be in common with other people. Now, I say that because just a few years ago, I had decided to move out of California, Northern California, to move to Utah. That's not the right choice for a lot of people. Oh, now, granted, there are a lot of people who made that decision to move too. But it doesn't necessarily mean that California is dead or doesn't have opportunities, and it doesn't mean that Utah is perfect. It isn't. But there are reasons why some people are making the decisions they're going to, and we ought to talk about that too. Now, the targets for doctors in the United States. Let's talk about what some of the targets might be. Now, just because many doctors are targeting some locations doesn't make them the best, but particularly for you. So some people say, look, it is more affordable. Inflation is running lower. It's a better place to raise a family or to build a building. But these are reasons that work for you and not for others. I am also, by the way, adding a little extra cautionary note that right now inflation is running very high and that interest rates are going to increase this year. That's going to happen, whether you like it or not, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're dead. And sometimes what people have to do is think a little further in advance where they want to go, not this year, but next year. And some people are looking for areas that have special opportunities for them. And that is something that is important here. Yes, some locations are going to have great potential for you. Now, maybe some sites have a built in patient base. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Just because everybody is moving to, say, Colorado or Florida or Texas doesn't mean it's the best place. But there are some locations that are going to have a built in patient base for one particular doctor. And the example I use is a legacy practice. That's what I refer to a practice where you've got a mother or father, a relative, uncle, something that people have already started a practice and they want you to join them. Does that mean that if everybody isn't going to that site, that it's a bad location? Well, I can tell you pretty honestly, no, that doesn't mean that. There are some places that, because of the nature of the location and your relationship to the people and the place, you'll have an advantage. You can't ignore those. And in fact, I want to tell you, if you've got an inn in some location, that's going to supersede most demographic variables. Now, remember, it has to be unique to you in order to have a place that runs counter to the common demographic trends to be worth going to. Now, that is the only reason, and I'm talking about a patient base unique to a doctor, that's the only reason to recommend states like Hawaii, Alaska, and West Virginia, for example. Look, Hawaii, lovely place to live, very difficult place in which to build a patient base, unless you've got someone who you know who's building the practice, and the same thing is true of Alaska. Alaska and Hawaii are very interesting places to go, but very few people, after they've made the effort, want to stay there. West Virginia is an example in which the economy has been very tough. Now, that doesn't mean that all sites in West Virginia are not going to be good for you. They could be fantastic. The idea is places in these states that running counter to the national trends just have to have the right doctor. It doesn't mean that any old person can step in. However, there are states where any old doctor can go in without an association to an existing practice or to a doctor who's practicing there. Now, sometimes circumstances conspire to make an otherwise acceptable area a total loser for you. Now, I bring this up locations like College Station, Texas, which it's the buckle of the Bible Belt. If you're not a Christian, you may have a more difficult time going there. If you're not Armenian, going to certain places in Southern California are just not really going to work for you because everybody is Armenian in some practice areas, and therefore you have an advantage. And it's an advantage that can't be replicated everywhere. But I'm going to tell you, there's some locations that if you happen to be the wrong ethnic group, wrong religion, wrong racial group, it's going to be an uphill climb. There are going to be headwinds. Doesn't mean you can't make it. It just means it's going to be harder. Now, an example would be an extreme weather situation. Now, here's what I'm saying. I love Arizona. I think Arizona is one of the best places on earth. It has been growing really well this year. In fact, a lot of people were surprised, demographers, by just how much Arizona all of a sudden changed. But listen, I was there in August one year. It was 115 degrees at midnight, and it can be tough if you don't handle the heat well. I found myself trying to run between areas of shade in a parking lot, and I'm not kidding. Now, the same is true of cold and humidity and other weather factors. Weather is not the only thing, but it can be a pretty devastating thing if you don't enjoy or at least take advantage of what the weather situation is. But the other things I was mentioning, race, ethnicity, culture, even growth, education levels, they matter. And so that's what Dr. Demographics is often helping you put in perspective. If you found a place that you like, it really helps having a research company that can do a very inexpensive but thorough examination to say, is this the right site for you? That's what we do. Now, not everyone loves a particular political or cultural point of view. And that's just fine. It may not fit you particularly well. This can seem like a little bit odd when everybody else seems to love it. But, there are parts of Florida, Texas that are tough. The same thing is true in New York, Minnesota, Michigan, in which you're going against the zeitgeist, the cultural influences and the feeling of the location. When that occurs, and it happens far more often than you really want to know what those turning points are in the cultural and political point of view of the area to see, is this area going to work for me? Because I've had it happen with a lot of doctors who say, I got to the area and I just hate it, and the people hate me. Enough said. Now, you may desire a special patient base, but not everyone knows that they are looking for a particular patient base. Age, socioeconomics, religion, education, household type, your countries of origin, the language group. Not all Spanish is Spanish. I mean, some people are speaking the Castellano and other people are more campesinos, and they're not doing the same kind of Spanish. Their clinical needs may also vary. And in fact, I'll give you the example of Tongan and Hmong, as they're very unique. They can be exceptionally good for the right doctor, but certainly not everywhere. Now, look, I happen to be pure Palangi. Okay. For those Tongan speakers, you know what I'm talking about. But I get along very well with Tongans, but not everybody does, especially Samoans. But I digress. We don't have to talk about rugby. The point is, you've got to find the right population that gives you a natural advantage, and you'll also enjoy. Now, if you know yourself, you have a big advantage. If you've got experience in practice, you're going to know the kinds of people you want to serve. I'm going to even go so far as to say the clinical services that you want to offer have to fit the demographic character of the people in the area. If they do not fit, it's going to be hard for you. Now, some people love doing dental implants. Some people don't really enjoy them. Some people are more cosmetic in what they're doing. I get that. But just remember that people and the clinical conditions they need kind of go together. That's what I'm saying. Now, I want to talk to you for a minute about generic or average. Are they worth targeting? Now, I say this because I've just talked about things that make people unique. There are some locations that you kind of have to appeal to those people who fit a particular language group, country of origin, clinical condition. Maybe they're rich, really rich, or maybe they're really poor. And I mean really poor. I've worked with doctors who want to specialize in them. And I have found if you have the idea of who you want to go after, great. But there is, in fact, a generic or average population that you're going to have to target. Those are the people who don't fit a demographic or cultural imperative. Now, many of these people are average or generic, and I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of them, a lot. And you can't easily divide them. Now, in terms of psychographics, we can take a lifestyle study and tell you what these people tend to have in common with each other. And therefore, your practice will take upon itself a certain demographic, but most importantly, psychographic character. Demographics are what people are. Psychographics are what people do, what they value, what they're like. Now, just because they are not unique, meaning that they stand apart from the majority of potential people in an area, is no reason to assume that you understand them. People vary in several levels. So if you can't just say, oh, I like working with the elderly, or I like working with kids. There are lots of brands of elderly people because of their backgrounds, because of their age cohort, may not be exactly what you're looking for. So if we take age as an example, at age 65, you're going to find a different population than age 45. But age 75, which is also considered geriatric population, they don't have as much in common with the people 10 years younger or older. So I'm saying just knowing what you're up against really helps. And that's something Dr. Demographics can tell you. Now, you're going to need objective observation and analysis on a site. I bring it up because we've got competitors who will say, oh, here's what the people are like. Great. And they provide facts. And I'm not saying those facts are wrong. I'm just saying it's incomplete. Because unless you understand the basis of how the age or the ethnic group or the language group really impacts what you're doing as a clinician, you're going to have a problem. And most demographers don't understand how to interpret or analyze the data that is going to matter most to you. You got to find someone who's been there and done that. At Dr. Demographics, we use more psychographics than any other vendor. We are not only looking for how many competitors there might be in an area or how many root canals might be done in an area. Look, I understand the application of clinical need and the profitability, but in the end, you're looking at healthcare because you're dealing with people. You don't know the people, you won't understand how to administer healthcare, at least on that side. In the end, there are many variables that combine in a unique way that show you how to succeed in that particular community. How big is a community? Well, I'm going to throw it out. Really, the community will significantly change every 7 to 15 miles from the practice. The people who are 10 miles away may look like the people who are close by, but they may not be. And remember, people are very geocentric, meaning they don't want to travel far to get to their healthcare providers. So you better know who you're treating or you want to treat. The messaging that you put out and the media that you use will apply, and it's important. And that's another thing that we can do at Dr. Demographics. We can look at the psychography and the media selections to come up with messaging that will work for you. And not all messaging is going to be based on discounts or clinical persuasion. Now, one of the things I really like about Mike Green, and he's doing most of this research on your behalf. I don't know if you know that, but Mike is one of the sharpest knives in the drawer. But we've investigated together a lot of the psychographic implications of practice, regardless of practice type. So, does dermatology treat all people the same? It certainly doesn't. And the same thing with osteopaths. And the same thing is true of dentists. You got to know the difference between these people to come up with the right clinical mix. Now, I assumed, for example, when I was young, that the San Fernando Valley, where I grew up, was middle America. I thought, yep, everybody is just like Woodland Hills. Again, that's where I lived. Boy, was I wrong. I didn't realize how unique that location was. But it's not just Woodland Hills or the San Fernando Valley. Every place has a unique character or flavor, if you will, and you better know it. Now, demographics by its nature is not defined by the outliers. Some people like to say, well, they're just like this or just like that. And again, that's the problem with doing only surface level market research. You got to get under the surface to really understand it. The bell curve shows that there are some people more on one side of the curve than another. You got to know where the apex of the curve is in order to know how that area is really going to respond to the services you want to offer. So one of the things that we do at Dr. Demographics is we help you understand what the bell curve in the population is really like. Now, I want to go into some locations, and I want you to pay close attention to what I have to say, because there are some places that surprisingly are losing a lot of population. Let's talk about the places losing most. Illinois, West Virginia, Hawaii, Alaska, and New York. They're bleeding people. So when you say, oh, everybody's moving to other locations, where are they coming from? Illinois, West Virginia, Hawaii, Alaska, and New York. New Jersey's not doing so great, at least in certain parts of it. And other parts, it's doing spectacularly well. Virginia's kind of turned a corner. If you look at North and South Carolina, generally they're strong, but not every town is equally as strong. So there's just some facts you have to keep in mind. Now, I want you to look at these states I'm going to mention, and I want you to see if you can find anything in common that they have with each other. Now, these are states that are growing fastest in the United States. Number one is Idaho at 2.12%. Arizona comes next at 1.78. And by the way, you ought to know, Nevada was ahead of Arizona for a good long time. But even then, parts of Arizona and parts of Nevada are not growing at all. Parts are doing great. Now, Windorf in Nevada, If you like the Peppermill, lovely place to go. And if you like rodeos, but a lot of people don't. And so it's not really changing very much. Now, Reno, Sparks, Las Vegas, and the areas north and south of them are doing great. And that's where the growth in Nevada is happening, 1.54% per year, which is a lot. We know that Arizona on its southern border is not doing as well as on its northern border. There are a lot of people who've moved into the West Arizona, and there's reasons why. For us to explain that, we have to focus on one state at a time. Now, Utah is doing pretty darn well, and I live in Utah. There's a reason I moved here, and it's why a lot of other people moved here. It is because it's a great place to raise a family. It has exceptionally good outdoor recreation. It didn't lock down in the pandemic, and it's reasonably affordable to live. Not perfectly everywhere, but it's got a lot of good housing that is not too expensive. So a lot of people thought, great. Texas has got lots of options. South Carolina, same thing. At 1.19% annual growth rate, South Carolina continues to surprise demographers. Florida, obviously, with its taxes, the Eastern corridor, a lot of people are moving down from the Northeast into Florida. You already know that. Washington State, surprisingly, is growing, but not in the Western side. It's growing in the Eastern side that's much more affordable and still has pretty spectacular lifestyle, cost of living, and also recreation. Delaware shocked everybody. Now, let me explain real quick what's going on in Delaware. At 1.04% annual growth, it isn't because Delaware is so magical and mystical. It just happens to be in the right place. You can reach on the East Coast almost all of Delaware without breaking a sweat. Trains are excellent. Air transportation spectacular in Delaware. It has a lot going for it because of its location, not because of its tax base or the cost of living, but it's got the location people like. And Montana, quite the opposite. There's not a lot happening in Montana except space. You can buy a house, you can build a house in Montana, and that accounts for almost a 1% annual growth rate. Now, I'm one of those people who tends to like Montana for a lot of reasons, not the least of which because of the outdoor recreation, but the people, the demographic character of the people, how nice they are, friendly. It's a welcoming place to go. And there's room, lots and lots of room. All right. Now, do you see then the things these states have in common? They aren't the same, but nevertheless, there are certain factors like cost of living and available land that continue to make all of them desirable, but it's often where they're located relative to population centers. Now, we can talk all day about demographics for some other guy. I'm not so interested in doing that. Look, I want to talk about demographics for you. It's a highly individualized thing, and that's the whole theme of our place on targeting. You can't target a generic population, nor should you be the generic doctor. You have to find out what strengths you have and preferences you have. That is the secret of your future success. Now, this is Scott McDonald. I want you to know at Dr. Demographics, we genuinely care about the doctors. So I want you to call us. Call us at our new 800 number, 800-849-0499. Give us a call and let's kind of talk about the potential places you want to go. We cover every place in the country. We handle all different kinds of practices. The only thing I like to remind people is our strength is really working in practices that doctors own, as opposed to a corporate type environment. So if you want to get rich, let's talk about how Dr. Demographics can give you the answers to find the perfect place to put a practice. And thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.